Now, when I tell you that there is a way to pay off for your mortgage with the house that you're paying the mortgage on, you're inclined to think,
Odetta, what in the world are you talking about?
But it's possible and it has been done. And that's exactly what today's video is about. Welcome back to my channel, my YouTube family, my rock stars. My name is Odetta and it's a pleasure having you back. Today we're gonna talk about exactly what I said earlier, which is how to pay off for your mortgage with your house. Now, it's important to remember that I am not a financial advisor. I'm just sharing things that I have done or things that persons that I coach have done successfully, or persons that I know very well have done. So you can take from it what you choose and do as you please, but be mindful that what I share may not work best for your circumstances, and it's up to you to evaluate the pros and cons and determine what's the best solution for you. That said, to leverage what I'm about to share and use your house to pay off your mortgage, you need to have been paying your mortgage for some time, and you need to live in a place where your property value actually appreciates with time. Like everything I share on this channel, there's usually a risk factor for you to consider. So again, evaluate your pros and cons. Now, as I'm explaining, I want you to focus more on the concept and less on the numbers, because this solution can work whether you have $1 million mortgage or you have a mortgage that's $50,000 US. It's important for you to be able to take the concept and extrapolate it to match your unique circumstances. So the first thing you need to do is evaluation of your property, which of course is your house and land, to determine the current value. Because this only works if you have equity in your property, that valuation will clearly state what you paid for the property versus what it's valued at today. Now, in the example that I'm gonna share with you to articulate what I'm trying to communicate, I'm gonna use a piece of property which included a house. So it's land and house when I say property. The property at the time was valued at the equivalent of $100,000 US. Now, when we did the valuation of that property 7 years later, in the market that we bought it, the property was actually valued at $300,000, which was 3 times what we bought it for initially. That means that when you take the current value of $300,000 and you take what you purchased the property for, which is likely what your mortgage is given against, that $100,000, and you subtract the two, $300,000 from $100,000, that $200,000 is the equity that you have in your property. Now, when banks are determining what your equity is, they don't usually do pure math and minus the 300 from the 100,000 and say your equity is 200,000. They actually will give you a percentage of that 200,000, and it's more to protect them and their interests. And our mortgage payment at $100,000 was $700 US, or the equivalent per month in Jamaican dollars. At the time, we know that we could afford to pay $1,500 US per month as a mortgage, which means that we could afford to pay twice as much as we were paying, which is the $700. What this confirms, and why it's important for you to look at your level of affordability and determine what it is you will need to be able to qualify for an additional loan, and if you can't pay enough to do so, you won't be able to get it. So our mortgage was $700, but our affordability level was $1,500, which means we could have taken out a second loan. So what we did next, having determined what the equity in our property is is we took the valuation report into our branch and we had a meeting with them, and we said, listen, we want to get a loan or borrow some money against this equity that we have in our property of $200,000. The bank looked at our existing mortgage, look how we had been paying it, which we were paying it very well. They looked at the valuation and they said, okay, the equity is $200,000. We're gonna give you 50% of that, which was $100,000 US. We took that loan and we bought a small townhouse, and we're gonna refer to this as property 2, and the original house that we have that we're living in as property 1. So it's property 1 and the equity in it that we are using to acquire property 2. The next step is to rent property number 2, which is the townhouse, for 3 years, or you can do so using either Airbnb or a long-term tenant. The reason why we did it for 3 years is because usually a bank will give you a hard time to get out of a loan facility or even a mortgage before 3 years after you have signed those papers to get that loan. With the use of Airbnb and occasionally a long-term tenant, we were able to collect $1,100 US on average for the townhouse that we had bought, which is property 2. Now, for property 1, we're still paying our $700 mortgage out of pocket. And for property 2, when we got the rent of $1,100 US per month, the mortgage for it, because it was $100,000, was $700, and we paid it from the rent, which meant that we had a surplus of $400 US per month. We then decided to take the excess or surplus and use it to help to pay down our original mortgage on property 1, so that when we are ready to pay it off, our balance would be significantly reduced. And we did that for the 3 years that we decided to keep the townhouse for. Now again, because we live in a market where property value appreciates significantly, the townhouse or property number 2, which we bought for $100,000, after 3 years it appreciated to $170,000 US in value, or the equivalent in Jamaican dollars. And you can use $150 to multiply it by any US number that I share, and you will get the Jamaican amount. At a value of $170,000 in 3 years from $100,000, it's a no-brainer. It's time to sell. So we went ahead and we sold property number 2, which is the townhouse, for $170,000. Now, because we had only been paying that loan for 3 years, we still owed the bank about the $100,000 that we had borrowed to begin with. So from the $170,000 that we sell the townhouse for, we pay off the loan for $100,000, and we have a surplus of $70,000 US left. Now remember, for the mortgage or for property 1, we were paying about $700 initially, and then we took the surplus of $400 for property 2 or the townhouse, and we were paying down that mortgage. Now when we decided to use the equity in property 1 and buy property 2, we had already been paying that mortgage for 7 years. And now it's 3 years after we have gotten property 2 or the townhouse and sold it. So 10 years later, our mortgage, and this is for property 1, of $100,000, the balance on it now was only $70,000. And guess what? $70,000 is the surplus from selling property number 2, which is the townhouse, because we sold it for $170,000, paid it off with $100,000, and then we take that $70,000 and we pay off for our mortgage on property number 1. It's as simple as that. So now you have your original property that you live in, which had the mortgage that is now paid up, and of course you sold property 2, but the whole purpose of acquiring property 2 with the equity in your house or your original property was to pay off the mortgage for your original property. Now I can really stop the video here, as I just shared with you how to pay off your mortgage using your house. However, you know I'm not gonna stop, because that, I would say, is what normal or average people do. And you know, my rock stars, on this channel, we do not do normal. So now I'm gonna tell you how to leverage your mortgage-free situation and become a US millionaire in a few years. So the first thing you're gonna do, you see that $700 that you used to pay out of pocket for your mortgage? You need to invest it, because quite frankly, you shouldn't be using it to do anything else. Now, when you invest $700 per month for 20 years at an interest rate of 7% per annum, you are gonna make, with compound interest, $368,000 US, and that again is for 20 years. Same conditions for 30 years, $700 US per month will equate to $858,000 US after 30 years. And listen, the power of compound interest is causing you to benefit and to accumulate $605,000 of that $858,000, which means you didn't contribute that. Just compound interest working the way it should, you were able to gain $600,000 more on your money. Anyway, if you do it for 40 years, you will have $1.8 million US, and the compound interest impact is $1.5 million, which means you only contributed $300,000 US, and the rest of it came because you leverage compound interest over time. So let me bring some perspective to it based on your age, because I know some of you often think, oh, I'm in my 40s, Odetta, I can't capitalize on this. You absolutely can. If you are in your 40s and you started to do this from then, by the time you get to your 60s, you would have accumulated $368,000 US just by investing the amount you would have paid for your mortgage now that you're living in a mortgage-free home. If you invest that $368,000 in a mutual fund, you will earn $2,146 US, or about $330